I guess the transitionary chapter really was in mine after the the events that just went down with the whole like stuff in Sistana and Ironside. Almost, I don't know why I fumbled his name like almost immediately. It's like probably got the easiest name in the series. What did I say? Like I was gonna say Ironside. Either way, with Ironside, but that generally happens when you have series that you just finish up a bit, even for like a smaller arc having something like this. And to a degree, it was an info dump chapter, but it was more of like an info dump chapter for the characters and a really funny setup just based off of the fact that you have Annie, who's like, oh yeah, who's the leader of this group? What's going on here with this? And none of them really have a leader. I guess for them it wasn't as much a adventuring group as it was just like some dudes hanging out going on an adventure. They didn't really have that as of like a priority, which is understandable. And Annie's like trying to figure out like seemingly like she just wants to be leader, but I feel like in reality like the other dudes like if she didn't bring this up, they probably never would have really even discussed this, because I don't think that just based off of where they were acting prior that they really needed a leader. Like you and your friends go out on an adventure. You don't have to have somebody to take command. I mean, Percival's the strongest, but he's the most immature, and Nasians doesn't seem like the kind of guy for it. Donnie doesn't seem like the guy for the responsibility whatsoever. And I guess we have Annie, who decided to take the initiative, and she wanted to be in charge, but none of them listen to her. She's like gonna be leader just by title and not by actual like authority or position. I did really like seeing her in that like chibi style that Percival it is drawn in when he's drawn like extra kind of like silly, just because it's very clear that like Annie is going now to be the female lead, and based off of her ability of being able to tell if someone's lying, and Percival being as super pure honest as he is, it's very clear that that's going to be like a factor between them. The stuff with Sin though was more interesting, I think, out of all the interactions this chapter. I think them just kind of like talking about like stuff like the Seven Deadly Sins was interesting from a story perspective, because like you have Percival, who has no idea about this. Like we know he's been up at God's finger and stuff, so it's not like he would like unless Varghese told him about the Seven Deadly Sins, there was no real way of him finding it out, unless he had like a book or something. He wasn't going to run into someone like Annie who would just outright tell him and they would kind of discuss it. Her horse, though, in this chapter was really strange. She has this like really goofy looking horse. It's like one of those, what are they called? Like the pygmy horses or whatever. They're barely like bigger than dogs. Because this one, like, it looks big on the upper torso, but it has these absolute minuscule legs, and then it's really goofy looking. What's his name? Sylvan. Like, this has to be like the worst horse so far. Maybe the horse will get character development, because outside of it kicking Percival, it just seems to be borderline a useless horse. There's like a part when they're just walking, and it was funny, this was what was used as like the semi-spread of the chapter. It was still like a double page, but it was like kind of like just a half portion. It was a really weird panel setup for this chapter, because like I said, it was more of a transitionary chapter. It was like, okay, we just got finished one little arc, now we gotta get ready for the next one, but the characters have to get there, and some character interaction is in order, because you can't just have, okay, they just finished this story arc piece, now they go to the next one. You gotta have stuff in between that really kind of just shows them being characters and not just them in plot-based scenarios and stuff. It's obviously really important to make sure that like the characters still feel like they're characters and not just people who fight and then occasionally talk to each other, The stuff with Sylvan, though, I was just like, what is this goofy horse? Like, what's going to be the point of this dude? I know it's like the thing about the four knights of the apocalypse. It's not the four horsemen. I would imagine maybe they've either got something that will be like a mount for them. Percival being the mark of death, so he'll be the pale horse. It'll be like a pale green color, and I don't think that's Sylvan. It'd be really weird if he was gonna end up riding this horse. I think I was talking to Bud about it. Go check out his channel, but I don't know if this would be Percival's horse as like goofy as he would look. I don't know. I feel like if if Nakaba is gonna give them mounts, because again they're Knights of the Apocalypse, they can have some form of mount. I don't think it's mandatory, but because he's not going with 4 horsemen, then even if he does get a mount, they don't have to be horses. But man, Percival, I don't know about Percival on this guy. I think he needs to get his own. Like, this dude looks a little silly. And not only does he look silly in like general stature, he's like making really goofy faces like the chapter, and he seems kind of useless. Like I said, they're just generally walking, and this dude is slower than this horse is slower than regular people walking. They're not sprinting. And Percival, we know he can outrun horses, but Donnie, for the most part, like right now, doesn't seem to have a lot of. He doesn't have any of those like kind of like superhuman combat-based abilities. He's like he has his whole levitation power with his dagger and like that whole magic, but none of what he's shown so far would show that he's like able to do things at like superhuman levels or beyond. Like we know like how crazy power levels get in the Sylvan and Sin's world or Nakaba's world, whatever he wants to call this, his general universe in this, considering like it. Would it be the 7 Deadly Sins verse, considering like the 7 Deadly Sins aren't the big focus anymore? I don't know. I wish we can get a name for it. Either way, like the stuff with Sin's like telling Sylvan that he's got to pick up the pace if they're pretty much going to eat him. I would assume that, Sin is just kind of kidding. I would like to imagine that Sin wouldn't be like, all right, I guess I got to fall through. Guess what? Sorry, Annie, I got to murder your horse. We're going to eat him. As much as a not very useful horse as he's been shown, he is still like he's still a good friend to Annie and like her mount companion. So I wouldn't assume that you would have to actually attempt any of these things. That'd be really weird. But then you have like you pretty much just got the whole information on the 7 Sins. This was a really good panel too. As much as this is like, from my perspective, and I think any reader's perspective, it's just like, oh yeah, obviously we're getting stuff that we know about, like that's very, very clear. But I always really like seeing stuff like this, like anything equivalent of like a character hype or stuff in the lore, seen from somebody that would only know about it, but from their perspective would also be like a really big deal. Like from the people reading the series, by the time they got to stuff like the Demon King fight, it's like they already knew all the 7 Deadly Sins and everything. Whereas like for some random person in Britannia, these guys are like heroes. They're legends, and not only are they crazy people in like the lore, but they're also like some of the strongest people that Britannia would ever have seen at any point. And Meliodas is still alive. Like all of them really are still alive except for Escanor, but like Meliodas is outright king. Meliodas is the one that you'd actually be able to go see, and I think that's one of the interesting aspects of it, because the other ones, it could be like, oh, well, maybe those characters would exist, or who knows where they are now. Meliodas is one spot. He's in Leonis. Like, he's running the place. So, well, I mean, I guess Merlin's still alive, but, like, Merlin, if she's in Camelot, it's not like you could ever actually, like, even potentially witness her. Like, you would only know that she's like, oh, yeah, I heard that she works for King Arthur. But outside of that, like, Meliodas is the only one that you would have the potential to visit. Or at least, like, if you went to Leonis during, like, some form of festival or something, and he decided to make an appearance, I don't know, you'd be like, oh, yeah, that's him. So those guys are real, that pure proof that this guy and, like, these guys all kind of, like, did this whole thing during the Holy War, because Meliodas is king now. Like, they accomplished what they were trying to do and save it. And as well as seeing the poster, the Meliodas poster, that was really cool, just because it's a story lore thing. It goes obviously way back to the beginning of 7 Deadly Sins, when they were still wanted criminals during the whole thing where they were framed. I thought that was pretty neat. Again, I do really like it when series do stuff like this, just because it gives a level of like liveliness to the verse. It shows that it's got more than just one direction of movement, and there's a lot of things just active at once that they have it, it makes it feel alive. It feels like a living world, and I do like that. I thought that was really neat, and it really gave some character to these guys. Like Annie already, I thought this was really good, actually, especially for her character after just getting into the main cast, because it gives us an insight also onto her from a personal level, not just her like want to be a holy knight, the stuff with her dad. It's like her whole thing about like, oh, this is my prized possession, and being a poster from way back, because this thing is actually older than her when you really think about it. Because it was, I'm trying to remember the time period that it was with the point where they got framed and then the start of Seven Deadly Sins. I think it was 13 years. I don't remember the exact. It was like 7 or 13 years or something. So it would be way older than Annie. Like, it would be years and years prior to her being born. So this, I thought that was just really cool, because this is pretty much like an antique at this point, like a collector's item. So it was just a really fun moment to have. And then they got the stuff with her, like, pretty much deciding that she's going to be the leader. None of the other guys really care. It's like, whatever. And even though they decide that, none of them really follow her. After that point, they're like, you have Sin, who pulls out a map, and we're just seeing a couple locations. Again, this is really neat, too. I like when we get just general maps to get an idea and layout of the area they're in. Like, that's one of the things. I'm happy anytime, really, a series does something like this on the map. Like, even regardless of, like, what's going on, I enjoy being able to get a layout of how they're doing things. But then there's a point they're talking about, like, the Dow Flare range. And Sin is, like, saying it's, like, a dark realm, and, like, they can't go there. If they go there unprepared, like, it'll be really dangerous. And Annie's like, oh, you're lying again? Theirs is the interaction that I think that Nakaba has big plans for just that general reveal. Because, obviously, if you're going to have Sin, who's very, very mysterious, keeping to himself, it's herself. We don't know anything about Sin, if Sin is a guy or a girl, whatever the hell Sin is supposed to be. But having someone like Annie that can just outright say, yeah, you're lying, it makes it like a really strange scenario, because at some point they're going to have to reveal it just based off of Annie knowing every single time that Sin is lying. Like, even if Sin just stops speaking around Annie, it's like Annie knows, Annie's going to bring it up again at some point, and it's going to be important to the team of, like, finding out what exactly is up with Sin if they're going to keep bringing up Sin. Like, hey, Sin, Annie's going to be, hey, quit lying. Why are you lying again? Hey, you're doing it again. It eventually would stack up to the point where it would feel weird if the characters didn't say, hey, what's up with this? Can you give us some information? Like, are you going to trust us? Like, even if you weren't going to, like, pry too much into Sin's, like, origin story, like, you weren't going to try and, like, deep delve into whoever Sin is from their perspective, you would have to be suspicious if this person you're with keeps lying to you at every turn, because they don't really know anything about Sin. And at some point I'd just be like, hey, if you're going to keep lying and you're not going to tell us, we might as well assume it's a trap, or you're trying to lure us into something that is very bad. Because what would be the point of not only lying without, like, any form of information, but after being called out, still trying to lie and still holding it? Because that would just be really suspicious. I'd just be like, hey, we gotta talk. Otherwise, we might have to make some group decisions. But then at the very end of the chapter, there was definitely the weirdest shock of what was going on, because, like, we see this bar. And the dude calling this dude Aberdeen, and I feel like the name was from Seven Deadly Sins. Like, there was a character named Aberdeen at some point. I don't remember. I don't know why I think that. That's not really important. It's just something that I just want to mention. But they're, like, talking about this guy, and they're like, oh, what's this old drunk? He's like, that's not just some drunk dude. You know how that is? And he's like, oh, that's the captain of the Leonis Holy Knights howitzer. And the last thing I really wanted to discuss with the chapter is Nakaba potentially being able to really pull up like a good turn of things with the Holy Knights of the previous series in this one. Because probably my biggest complaint about Seven Deadly Sins as a whole is, like, there's stuff that obviously, like, I was not a fan of. There was definitely some decisions that I was not a fan of at all in Seven Deadly Sins. But the biggest thing for me would be how the Holy Knights were treated, because they really just seemed pointless after, like, the first arc. And you had that stuff with, like, the Dryads and not Dryads, Druids, right? And then they went to go train, and then you had, like, was it Howitzer? You had Gil Thunder. I'm trying to remember the last dude's name. Dreyfus's son. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But you had them go train, and then nothing really came of it. It was really weird. It's kind of like how Nanashi showed up to kind of like be adjacent to Arthur, but didn't do anything in Seven Deadly Sins. But it looks like he's going to be doing stuff in Four Knights of the Apocalypse. And the reason that the Holy Knights really kind of became irrelevant in Seven Deadly Sins is because just the power creep. You had like all the characters get way more powerful, all the main cast members, and none of the Holy Knights kind of kept up. I really wish that Nakaba just said like, oh well, maybe it's like the three big Holy Knights, the three mains that were seemingly part of the story, Gilthunder, Howitzer, and again I can't remember Dreyfus' son's name, but like maybe them combined could have taken down one of the 10 Commandments or something like that, or maybe you could have had more kind of like minions who are like mid bosses, like if you pulled out one of the like a demon that is like, oh well, this is essentially like the assistant of whichever 10 Commandment, and then giving them like a good fight, like just like somebody that wouldn't be much of a fight for someone like Meliodas or any of like the Seven Deadly Sins, but it would be somebody that, based off the situation, maybe they're in a fight and they can't go over and deal with like this other guy, but you have Gilthunder and all those dudes who are able to do anything. But based off of like where we know the main cast in Four Knights of the Apocalypse is at in strength, you could have people like Howitzer and all them be really irrelevant, and Nakaba could do a lot of justice to their characters by making them more relevant now, because the main cast is so much lower in power versus where the Seven Deadly Sins were, especially at this point, that you could have, well, I mean, sort of. I mean, they sort of were, but for the most part, it was like kind of like they seemingly were nerfed. Like, we know Meliodas was nerfed. King was just being a goofball. Bondin of a sacred treasure. Merlin is Merlin. Escanor is entirely situational on the day and stuff. But you could have someone like Howitzer, Gilthunder, them seem way more powerful, obviously be a way bigger deal than like the main cast, and give them more time to actually kind of like live up to where they're at, rather than just kind of like get overtaken entirely like they did in Seven Deadly Sins. And I'm perfectly fine if current events can kind of like give value to like older stuff. I mean, that's perfectly fine, because obviously it's a continuation, it's a continuously moving world, and just because it's older stuff doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. It doesn't mean that all is forgiven, like it's just everything back then it's completely undone, but it's like it would really do justice for them now, and I think that'd be a really good move for him. But yeah, I thought this was a solid chapter. I thought it was pretty good, pretty entertaining. It was very strange, but yeah, other than that, I'd really appreciate you to comment below, thumbs up the video, but friend the like button, subscribe, and check out my other videos. But than that, I appreciate everyone's already subscribed. Thank you for listening. Bye.